I want to start out with the history of money. I think it's very important, and I'll cite from Neil Ferguson's book, The Ascent of Money, where Professor Ferguson says in the book there are three axiomatic facts about it. Number one, it's a technology that we're using to transfer goods and services among ourselves to avoid bartering. Number two, it's a trusted network. And so I brought some props tonight. And so you see these in my neighborhood, these are Italian singles. And now what are these things? They're actually pieces of fabric. We call it paper money. But this piece of fabric here is about 25% linen, 75% cotton. There's a little strip in there. Interestingly enough, for America, only white dead males on our money. Last industrial nation that does that. But what is this really worth? At the end of the day, it's not worth that much. And one of the axiomatic facts from Professor Ferguson's book is that this technology, this money, is always worth less than the goods and services that we're transacting for. But what's important about this is it's a trusted network. I can pass this on to somebody, and they know with great confidence they can pass it on to somebody else. But as Satoshi Nakamoto said, or the group of people known as Satoshi Nakamoto, the inventor of Bitcoin, and the group or the gentleman or the woman that wrote this white paper, they basically explained that this money throughout history has been corrupted. And this money throughout history, particularly in the modern era, we've had two big episodic events, 2008 into 9, and now the COVID-19 situation where we're manufacturing this money and it's causing some level of instability in our society. In the United States, $469 billion was printed in the first 5 months of the year. As you know from some of our past conversations, I grew up in a blue-collar family. My dad was a laborer. He was an hourly worker. I priced his earnings in 2016 while I was on the presidential campaign, and I pointed out to the candidate, my dad's 1976 earnings priced in 2016, they were down in real terms 26.5%. If you're listening in and you have dollar-denominated assets, well, you've been taxed by the central bank because of inflation. The $10,000 that you had in your bank account last year has the purchasing power equivalent of $9,200. And so in comes Satoshi Nakamoto with this idea. And the central thesis of this idea and the eureka moment for me was the notion that the blockchain could create a permissionless transaction between two parties that may not know each other, don't necessarily have to trust each other, but over the blockchain, they can make this transaction by creating a decentralized effect, taking out third parties. And this is something that I think is a eureka moment. And if you go back and study gold and you understand why this precious metal has value, about 5 or 6% of the cost of gold would be for the manufacturing effect that gold has on our society. The rest of it is the perception of that store of value. And I think this cryptocurrency revolution, and Bitcoin specifically, because of its scarcity, is going to transcend gold. It's more portable. It's impregnable in terms of the transaction over the blockchain and that network, and it's being adopted quite rapidly, a result of which the prices are going to go a lot higher.
When you say this is, in a sense, a bit of a breakthrough moment, one thing I would like to know from you is, what is the problem to which cryptocurrency is the answer? We'll come on to whether it's a bubble in a minute and whether you owe each other a tulip or not. But is there something that is really going on here, or is it just kind of a nice idea because we've got the technology, so we might as well?
Well, listen, there's a lot going on. I mean, I just 30 seconds of addressing Peter. I think it's important. If you accept that we've moved into a digital society, and if you accept that we're adopting things on the internet, and so therefore there is value on the internet. As an example, Facebook.com, that URL has value. Amazon.com has value. And so then the question is, does the Bitcoin network itself have value? And I believe it does. It's at 125 million users right now. I think it's going to 1 billion users. I think Cathie Wood is going to be correct. 1 billion users by the end of 2025. And so we would go to Professor Robert Metcalfe at MIT and we would say, Dr. Metcalfe, does a network in itself have value? And I think the answer to that is yes. To answer your question specifically, we have a tendency to corrupt our money. We've been doing that forever. This is the 50th anniversary since the abrogation of the Bretton Woods Treaty by Richard Nixon on August 15th, 1971. And to Peter, I'll make a point on Peter's behalf. We were measuring these currencies in gold 50 years ago, $35 an ounce for gold in 1971. It's roughly $1,700 or so dollars an ounce today. We've corrupted our money. There's some best-selling books behind Peter about the great crash and the overall corruption of money. And I've read those books that Peter has written. I would encourage everybody to read them, because he's explaining that when you start to corrupt the money, every single person on this call tonight has been gypped some way or taxed some way by a central banker as a result of that money proliferation. And so what the Bitcoin is solving for is we can make this widespread. We can have a network of billions of users. And because of the scarcity of Bitcoin, there are 21 million coins out there, several million of which have left to be mined, but 2 or 3 million that were likely lost and as a result of early adoption, poor storage. And there are 49 million global millionaires, according to JP Morgan. We don't even have enough Bitcoin for each global millionaire to own one Bitcoin. And if you believe that that network has value, Peter is suggesting that it doesn't, because all it is a cryptograph on the internet. But I would suggest that that network itself is very, very valuable. It's a trusted network. And the breakthrough for me is it's a libertarian concept. I have this code. I can transfer it to you as a representation of a ledger. Of the money in my pocket, that's a ledger. This piece of fabric is really not worth anything. But somebody believes that it is. And we have to stop that, because this is being printed now in a massively corruptive way around this. It's like 31% increase in M2 since April of 2020.
First of all, the point that we're addressing here about the problem, I agree. Yes, paper money, fiat money is a huge problem, and intrinsically it has no value. The value of that piece of paper that Anthony is holding on to comes predominantly from faith. When we had real money, you didn't have to have faith because you had gold. You had a real commodity, and everybody knew its value because everybody knew what you can do with gold. But fiat currency, people just believe it has value, but it also gets value from the fact that governments declare it as legal tender, and governments require the payment of taxes in that currency. And so there is a natural demand. Nobody wants to go to jail, so everybody needs dollars in order to pay their taxes. And so that's where the value comes from. The problem with Bitcoin, one of the many problems, is its value comes from the same thing. It's confidence. You have to believe that it has value. You have to believe that other people are going to want it. Maybe you have to believe in this network. But at the end of the day, its value is derived from confidence and belief, except you don't even have the government behind it to force you to pay taxes in it. So I think it's much easier for that faith and that confidence to be lost. Bitcoin was the first cryptocurrency. There's now over 11,000 other ones that exist. I mean, who's to say that Bitcoin won't be passé, that some of these other coins will become more popular and people will forget about Bitcoin? I mean, generally, the first mover is not always the last mover. And, I know that, yeah, we're going digital. A lot of things now are digital, but that doesn't mean that everything is digital. I don't live in a digital house. I don't eat digital food. I don't drive a digital car, and I'm not going to have digital money, because money is a commodity. It is a real thing. It cannot just be replicated digitally. If you want to have a store of value, if you want real money, then you need something like gold.
And what I would say to Peter about gold, I respect gold and I understand gold's cultural and historical tenets, but software is eating the world. Every book behind me right now, I can digest that book into this smartphone. And then I have room for my photos and everything else. And I think what Mr. Nakamoto or Mrs. Nakamoto, the group known as Nakamoto, suggested is, if we've got money, and this is where Peter and I would intellectually disagree, gold is just another representation of value. It is a ledger. The human beings for 5,500 years are trying to come up with a ledger between each other so that they can exchange goods and services without bartering. Gold is just another representation of that. So all Nakamoto is saying is, this meets the three tenets. It's scarce, it can be networked, and I can transfer it to you in an impregnable way. We don't have to like or trust each other, but I can create that one-on-one experience without having to go through a third party. One last quick point.
Yeah, quick one back to Peter and then to the audience, because we've got some great questions. You'll have to keep going for those.
If we capture a meteor, very valuable one, that's got $2 quadrillion worth of gold, it's going to super disrupt that market. Bitcoin can't be disrupted. It can't be recreated. 125 million users is less than 2% global saturation. If I'm right, if Cathie Wood is right, you'll be at over 1 billion users. Yeah. And these coins will be worth several times more than they're worth today.
But
and maybe Peter and I can have that debate in 4 or 5 years about where this. The blockchain and the introduction of cryptocurrency and the tokenization is going to allow us to do things way more efficiently in our society in terms of transferring goods and services. And I'll just remind you of this. We have to take these things from the government now, the money. Our identities are actually granted to us from the government, where we get a passport or a driver's license. But in the world of the blockchain and the concepts of tokenization, our identity actually becomes ourselves, and it can be expressed over that network. And I just want people to think about the magnitude of that and the freedom of that, and the fact that this is so decentralized that it's relatively uncorruptible. And we know how frail human nature is as it relates to corruptibility. So I do think the world has been greatly improved, and I think Bitcoin is here to stay, and it will be a transfer mechanism for value and a store of value, and possibly a global currency over time.